Hello, how are you doing today? My name is John Cherry, and I want to welcome you back to this tutorial series. And in this PowerPoint tutorial, we're going to go through an introduction to ASP.NET. Now, these first tutorials are going to be more based on giving you a basic framework structure of what ASP.NET is and what the .NET framework is. And then later, as we progress through this series, it's going to be more just code base and showing you actual examples. It's not going to be a tutorial series much longer in this, but I believe it's necessary to give you kind of an introduction to the .NET framework, that we go over some of these points so that you can clearly understand what is happening in the background. So here are some .NET framework characteristics. .NET is a software platform. It's also a managed computing platform. It is not just a language, it is a framework. To clearly define it, it's a runtime and a library for writing and executing written code. Another main characteristic of the .NET framework is that it's object-oriented. So all the coding and all the base code, think of it in the form of objects. So for example, if you were writing some code to demonstrate how a shop works, what are some objects in a shop? You could have the cash register, you could have the change in the cash register, and you can think of these things as objects. And within the .NET framework, whether you're coding in C# or Visual Basic, you'll be able to perform actions on those objects. And we will discuss that later as we go through what C# is later in this course and how to code methods and variables and different things of that sort. So what is ASP.NET? ASP.NET is a framework for developing web-based and Windows-based applications within the Microsoft development environment. And I will go through this diagram, just kind of basic before I introduce some things about ASP.NET. As you can see, the first time the client makes a request, it hits the server. And once the first request hits, it will go to the page that it is requesting from. So in that case, in ASP.NET, page.aspx. It will generate through the ASP.NET runtime, and the .NET classes will get compiled and run through the CLR, and then that subsequent request and all requests, the response will go to the client. And I will break that down further into the baseline architecture of the .NET framework. And this architecture and this diagram pretty much demonstrates the .NET 4.5 framework. Right now we're currently on 4.52, but some of the main pieces are roughly the same. As a key factor, if you look right here, this is what we're looking at. ASP.NET web applications utilizing web forms. But other things inside of that area, you also have MVC, which is the Model View Controller, which is a different type of compilation within the .NET framework. You also have web pages and single page applications. And to kind of break down some of these pieces, we're going to be mainly focused here and utilizing Visual Studio. But let's break down a few of these pieces. What is this right here? The CLR. Well, the CLR this acts as an execution engine for the .NET framework. All .NET programs execute under the supervision of the CLR. It is the main compilation that runs through everything. Some other key factors is you have the base class library. This is a library of functionality which are available to all languages using the .NET framework. It consists of all the different classes, interfaces, and reusable types that integrate with the CLR. You also have the portable class library, and the portable class library is a project within Visual Studio that allows you to develop and build manage assemblies that work on multiple .NET platforms. Using a portable class library lets you choose the platforms you want to target. Some other things that are important to look from this diagram is the dynamic language runtime. And the dynamic language runtime provides a runtime environment for different languages besides what we consistently use within ASP.NET, languages like Python, for executing full control of the CLR. And a few other things that we can look at from this, I will discuss it further as we go through the course and as we actually start developing code. Another key factor that we're going to look at in this course is right here, the entity framework. In ADO.NET Entity Framework, this is used to query and store data in relationship databases, and it's an ORM fashion, which is object relational model. So it abstracts the data access into classes, which we will run within ASP.NET Web Forms to create our data access layer. And we will utilize Linq queries, which this allows you to query data from various data sources using the Linq structure. And we will go into some of these as we go through this course. So how does this all work, right? And this is kind of how it's broken down for code compilation. And I will go through this diagram in short. So essentially, think about it. When the first time a page is requested, compilation happens when the page is requested the first time. The first time a page is requested, the code is compiled. Compiling code in .NET means that a compiler first steps is emit Microsoft Intermediate Language. So what happens is, as a person requests this page here, right, which in this case will be default.aspx, it will first determine which language it is. And then it will go to the compiler for that language. And in this case, let's say we're using C#. It will break down the C# in the compiler, which then will be compiled into Microsoft Intermediate Language. And this is the first step, which produces the metadata. And the following step will be converted, the missile language will be converted to native code. So Microsoft Intermediate Language code is an assembly language style. It is CPU independent and therefore can be efficiently converted to native code. The conversion in turn can be CPU specific and optimized. The intermediate languages provides a hardware abstraction. The missile, the Microsoft Intermediate Language, is executed by the Common Language Runtime. So once it's in the missile language, it will go to the JIT compiler, which is inside of the Common Language Runtime. You can think of the CLR as the brain of this operation. And the Common Language Runtime contains just-in-time compiler to convert missile code into native. This is done on the same computer architecture that the code should run. The runtime manages the code when it is compiled into missile language. The code is therefore called managed code. So think about it. Let's go back here. You have the source code, which is here, right? It finds the language compiler right here, determines whether it's in C#, Visual Basic, whatever language you're using, takes it, converts it to missile code. The JIT compiler then turns it within the CLR into native code, and the response turns back into the page. And this is essentially just kind of an abstraction concept of how the .NET framework, ASP.NET, code compilates whatever is being requested and responded from the web server. This is going to give you a kind of a future aspect of what ASP.NET 5 will be. They're currently working on it as we speak, which it's given the term ASP.NET 5 or vNext. And kind of the main difference between this is that they are focusing kind of on Azure, looking at services, and kind of unifying MVC, web pages, and web API into one framework. They're also focusing on Signal R, which uses client-server communications between each to make it real-time. We're mainly focused on web forms going forward, but this is just kind of give you an upside or give you a future look into what ASP.NET and Microsoft, what they're doing in the future. Something to look forward to. Now, there is two types of projects you can do within ASP.NET Web Forms. You have a website versus a web application. I will let you go through and read the differences between the two. But the main thing is that a website, if you're doing FTP to a server where you could just want to transfer pages directly over, you can. It's much better if you're doing a lot of pages, you have a lot of people within your organization that are just FTPing and you don't want to have to recompile all the DLLs every time. You can just do it with the transfer, because with the website, the compilation is dynamic. It happens the first time the request hits to the web server. You can also pre-compile it to make it run faster, but the compilation is typically in multiple assemblies. Now, sometimes a web application is good to go because it's in one single assembly, and sometimes the speed when it hits the web server, it will go quicker. Really, it's just a preference. They all are compilated and run fast. It's just really your preference at this point, but it's an interesting thing to think about, because one thing about a web application, when it's on the server, the C# code and all the back-end codes for each code behind page are shown through a website project. For a web application, all the DLLs are compiled, they run into a single assembly, so it's a little more secure for whoever you give access to your web server. But this is something to consider as you're creating projects going forward. So why would you want to pick ASP.NET, and specifically why would you want to pick ASP.NET Web Forms? ASP.NET drastically reduces the amount of code required to build large applications. It provides better performance by taking advantage of early binding, just-in-time compilation, native optimization, and caching service right out of the box. All of the processes are closely monitored and managed by the ASP.NET runtime. So if your process is dead, a new process can be created in place, which keeps your application constantly available to handle requests. This is kind of an abstraction of some class libraries that run within ASP.NET. You have the system.web.ui control, and these are some of the server controls you will be exposed to as we go through this tutorial. Also the base validators, which are regular expression validators, custom, required field validators when you're doing for forms. Some server controls you can drag onto the page to make your forms easily on the client and server side be required for whatever you're trying to validate. You'll also have different web controls, and we will go through a lot of these through our tutorials when we actually start coding in this tutorial. Kind of a summary is the .NET framework is a great framework for building websites and web applications. .NET is a great software platform and an advanced runtime/library for writing and executing written code. ASP.NET websites and ASP.NET web applications are great for developing small-scale and large-scale applications for your business and individual needs. And like I said, throughout this series, it will be less PowerPoints and less information, and will be more hands-on practical examples. But for the first couple of presentations, it is important to kind of go through some of the logistics of the .NET framework to learn what is actually happening within the framework as your application is compiling, so you know the pieces of the puzzle and how they work. So like I said, as we go further in this, it will be less and less information and more examples, so that you can move further within the .NET framework and understand and actual practical examples of what we're doing. And on deck, I will discuss what Visual Studio is next, and we'll give an actual practical startup for installing Visual Studio and actually working with it throughout this tutorial series. I want to thank you very much for joining, and I look to see you in the next tutorial. Thanks.